Hi there, and welcome to this lecture segment on coastal processes. In this lecture, we are going to take a specific look at once the river deposits its sediment into the ocean, how the ocean takes over and distributes that sediment along the coastline. It's important to realize as I talk about this process that the sand is not staying still. It may be easy to believe when you go to a beach that that sand is the same sand that you saw when you were there maybe a year before. But it's not. It actually changes quite a bit on a day-to-day to even a week-to-week level. And so in this lecture, you're going to learn about how that happens and why that happens. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's go to the next slide. So to start off this conversation, I want to talk about wave energy in the ocean because that is the driver of this whole process. Basically, when you're out in the open sea, wind is obviously hitting the ocean all across the entire oceans, and that wind energy is being transferred into the water to create the waves to begin with. Now, it's important to realize that the water is actually not moving forward in that process. When you're on the beach and you're looking at waves coming in, you're seeing the water move forward there, but there's a reason for that, and it's very localized to the coastlines, and actually a very important part in how the sand is transported. But when you're out in the open sea, the water is actually traveling in what we call orbitals. And that would be analogous to this part of the diagram here where you see these orbitals going down. And the energy of the wind that's transferred into the water is only going down as deep as half of the wavelength. And so wavelength is defined as going from crest to crest. So that length there is a wavelength. And that wave's energy is only going to go down as deep as half of that length. So wave energy from the wind is only in the very top part of the ocean column. Now that energy, once it reaches a coastline, which is what most people actually see, that energy is actually going into an area that's much smaller and gets really small once you get towards the shoreline itself. Whereas out here, the energy had enough room to mobilize in the natural way it would, which is making the water move in these orbitals. It's actually much like the earthquake waves we talked about. The energy of the earthquake waves are moving forward, but the earth isn't rushing forward itself. It's responding by either compression and expansion or up and down. The water is actually responding in a different way to that wave energy, and that is these orbitals. But when that energy is forced to be squeezed into a smaller part of water, what the wave energy ends up doing is making the water come up higher or taller. And that actually makes the wave too tall to sustain itself, so when it finally gets to the very shallow part of the system, the water falls forward. And that falling forward motion is what we all see when the waves are crashing on the shoreline. It's also the area that surfers look for, because that's the waves they actually ride, is when the wave is falling forward. That's what they're sitting on and riding as that is happening. So surfers will hang out over here to catch a wave and ride it into the beach area. So basically, that is what you should be thinking about this area when we talk about how sand is transported. The sand is transported all in this zone. All right, so let's get into the next slide and into something called wave refraction. In the sciences, no matter what kind of wave you're talking about, wave refraction means the bending of a wave. And for ocean waves, this is happening because as the wave enters an area, so here's the coastline here, you can see the surf zone right there. And you could see that the waves are coming in at an angle, and they almost always will, because the wave crests are never going to really be parallel to the shore until you actually get really close to the shoreline. you should notice that when you're at the beach, the waves seem to be coming in parallel all the time. But that's, that's not by chance. That's actually controlled. And you can see well out here that these wave crests are coming in at an angle. And that's due to the wind energy pushing it in this general direction. So why do we see it coming in as a parallel wave to the coastline when we're standing on the beach? Well, that's the bending part. And what happens is this part of the wave crest will hit the shallow water first. And this is where the velocity of the wave is actually going to slow down first as well. This part of the wave is still in the deeper water and is moving as fast as it always was out here. So when this slows down and this is continuing moving as fast as it was, what ends up happening is this ends up moving out this way. So it's not coming in at this angle anymore. Now it's coming in more at this angle because this is moving fast, this is slowed down. So then the wave train will come in basically parallel to the shoreline as a result. Now, it's not perfect. It's actually, there's still a slight angle, and you can kind of see that in this picture. You can see it's more parallel there, but it's not perfect. It may appear that way from this vantage point standing on the beach, but as you can see, it's not a perfect parallel. But what ends up happening is because of that wave refraction, we end up getting a lot of sand transport in the direction that the arrow is showing right there. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what goes on to deposit beach sand. So along our coastline and a lot of coastlines that are tectonically active like ours are, you're going to see a lot of what are called headlands and bays. This is a headland, and this is as well, and this is even a headland too, but it's cut off. But it's made out of very resistant rock. That's why it can stick out to begin with, because when the wave beats on it, it doesn't break down as quickly as obviously this did, because originally the coastline would have been more just parallel to the waves coming in. But we get these headlands developed because they are more resistant rock. And the headlands that are created along our coastline a lot of times, especially in the Bay Area, or basically between San Francisco and Santa Cruz, there's a lot of granitic rock that has been transported in by the San Andreas Fault from Southern California's part of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And it actually is acting to create the headlands along that coastline. Very resistant type of rock there. And it sticks out, and so the waves will end up battering that first because it's sticking out. And that's because with wave refraction, with this sticking out and the wave train is coming in, it's actually shallow water here first, and it's still deep out here. So what ends up happening is the wave trains end up bending right in to the headland. Not really hitting straight on. You'll notice the arrows are kind of curving in on either side. And that's just due to the way wave refraction will work with a headland. And that actually makes the energy in the bays lessened, because all of the energy is being focused into the sides of the headland instead of in this area. The energy is more dissipated here. And that is what's allowing the sand to deposit at all, because the sand won't deposit unless the energy is low enough so that it can fall out of the water column. If the water is very turbulent and energetic and moving, it's going to just take that sand with it. And what you're going to end up with is a coastline without any sand at all. And at our headlands, that's why we don't see any sandy beaches there, because the energy is just way too great. And if you go out to the beach and you look out at the headland, you can see the waves are constantly just crashing into it and beating it up. So that is part of how wave refraction will basically delegate where the sand goes. Let's go ahead now and go to the next slide. And here's an actual photograph. This is north of San Francisco. I think this is somewhere near Stinson Beach. But basically, here is a headland, and here's a headland that's sticking even further out into the sea there. and you'll see there's no sandy beaches along that. It's very rocky. It's a very quiet day wind-wise, so you don't see a whole lot in the way of crashing waves so much. You see a little bit. But you can see the sand deposited in there, and you can see clearly this is a more quiet area of the coastline. This would be more energetic. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide now. And longshore current is something that happens along our coastline, whether it has headlands and bays or not. And so this is occurring along all shorelines all around the world. It's not a unique thing to California at all. The longshore current is defined as a current of water that runs parallel to the shoreline. And it's created by the refraction of waves, like you see here, the bending of waves. And it's actually traveling. So if we have the wave crest coming in, the wave train coming in this direction, the longshore current will always travel in this direction because this is kind of pushing the whole thing along. So the longshore current is the current of water traveling parallel to the shoreline. And it's located within the surf zone, so it's still in the ocean. We're not talking about the sandy beach. We're talking about in the water where the surfers are hanging out waiting for their waves. That's where this longshore current of water is actually at. There's another term that's called longshore transport. Again, longshore current is referring to the water that's moving parallel to the shoreline within the surf zone. Longshore transport is referring to the sand that's being transported in the longshore current. That's the distinction. So when you say the word longshore current in your sentence, you're just simply referring to the water that's moving parallel to the shoreline in the surf zone. When you say longshore transport, you're incorporating the sediment that's being transported in that water that's moving parallel to the shoreline. So sometimes I have students who are confused between that difference unless I explain it in the lecture distinctly. So I just wanted to do that so that there was no confusion, because they are fairly close terms and I want to make sure you can see that distinction there. Now, these images and block diagrams that I'm showing you don't really show this longshore transport or longshore current more specifically very well. You kind of have to trust that the water is moving that way based on seeing the refraction of waves and all of that. I have a film that I'm going to show you that's actually older. It's older than I am actually, but it's lasted in the educational community for years because it actually does a really good job of showing how longshore transport works and a lot of different other issues on the coastline as well that are still very apparent today. So I'm going to have you watch that video. It's going to be a very important video. One of the things about it is it was filmed in the 60s. And one of the things about it is they actually put dye in the longshore current so that you could actually see, and then they put it outside of the longshore current area. So they put it within the surf zone, and then they put a spot of dye away. And you can clearly see the dye moving parallel to the beach. And that's what that will show you that there is this current going on. And you'll see the spot of dye they put out here is not going to move hardly at all. So the good news is this dye has been recycled over and over and over again through the showing of this film. I don't think a movie can be created today where people are sticking dye in the ocean. That would be probably a bad thing. But the dye that was put in there in the 60s at least is being reused as an educational tool over and over and over again so people understand what's going on at the beach. So don't let the dye alarm you. It's not something that we constantly do at the beach, especially now. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and stop the lecture here. And I ask that you go ahead and watch that film next before you listen to any of the other parts of the lecture, because I think while you have this fresh in your mind, it'll make sense to listen to it now. And that movie is called Beach, A River of Sand. So, and you should see the link there in the module. If you don't, that simply means I forgot to put it in there. So go ahead and email me right away if it's not already there, and I will put it up right away. That's it for the lecture. I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you very much.